Malware. In the earliest days of personal computing, digital threats were born out of localized disruption rather than global financial crime. This basic iteration of malicious software was a blend of code designed to infiltrate and damage a computer system without consent. It solved the attacker's problem of needing a way to manipulate a machine's behavior without having physical access to the keyboard. What changed compared to physical sabotage was that a digital file could now override a system's boot sector or cause sudden crashes. The real-world impact was relatively small but frustrating, forcing early hobbyists to manually rebuild their operating systems. However, a major limitation existed because this code was completely static and required a user to manually carry a floppy disk to execute the file, meaning it could not spread rapidly across the globe on its own. As computers began connecting through widespread networks, the limitations of physical file sharing disappeared, leading directly to automated network threats. This stage introduced autonomous code that actively scanned the internet for open vulnerabilities to copy itself onto new machines. It solved the attacker's problem of relying on human errors or physical disks to distribute their code. What changed compared to early static malware was its ability to spread exponentially without any user interaction, jumping from network to network in hours. The real-world impact was immediate as global networks ground to a halt, overloading corporate email systems and early internet providers. Despite this speed, a critical limitation remained because these worms were incredibly loud and easy for network administrators to track. They created massive traffic that firewalls could block once the specific loophole was patched, and they offered no reliable way for the attacker to monetize the infection. As high-profile attacks drew heavy law enforcement scrutiny, a segment of the cybercriminal world pivoted towards silent, long-term persistence. This technique involved sneaking a highly optimized piece of code onto a system to hijack its processing power, specifically to mine digital cryptocurrency. This constant mutation rendered traditional antivirus software completely blind, as there was no static file signature to match against a database. The ultimate limitation was the rise of modern, behavior-based security detection, which monitors how a program acts rather than what it looks like, instantly flagging an app if it attempts to consume maximum CPU resources. Phishing. To bypass the strengthening network firewalls that blocked automated worms, attackers shifted their strategy away from pure software vulnerabilities and began targeting human psychology. This technique involved sending fraudulent digital communications, typically emails, designed to look exactly like reputable sources, such as major banks. It solved the attacker's problem of secure operating systems blocking direct code execution by convincing users to willingly hand over credentials. What changed compared to network worms was that hackers no longer needed complex technical exploits. They simply needed a convincing written message and a fake logging dashboard. The real-world impact shifted from broken computers to ruined lives, as everyday users suffered identity theft and drained bank accounts. However, a major limitation existed because these early campaigns were sent out as mass blasts to millions of random addresses at once. This lack of personalization meant that basic email spam filters quickly learned to recognize the generic templates and block them before delivery. As generic spam filters became highly effective at stopping mass email blasts, cybercriminals evolved their social engineering tactics into precision strikes. This advanced stage involved deep research into specific individuals or corporate financial managers to create hyper-realistic impersonations. It solved the limitation of mass phishing getting flagged by automated security systems by ensuring each message looked entirely unique and legitimate to the recipient. What changed compared to mass attacks was the introduction of intense psychological urgency and accurate personal details gathered from public profiles. This led to a massive real-world shift where attackers impersonated CEOs or trusted vendors to trick employees into wiring millions of dollars directly into fraudulent accounts. The financial devastation to modern businesses grew exponentially. As a result, organizations enforced strict verification policies, yet the persistent limitation remained that the strategy still relied on a human making a mistake, and the rising adoption of multi-factor authentication began preventing hackers from using stolen passwords. Ransomware. Seeking a more direct method to turn software infections into immediate cash, attackers combined malicious code with advanced mathematics to hold user data hostage. This specific subset of malware silently infected a computer and used incredibly strong encryption standards to lock up all documents and critical databases. It solved the cybercriminals' long-standing monetization problem by forcing the victim to pay a ransom, usually in untraceable cryptocurrency, to obtain the unique private decryption key. The real-world impact was a wave of panic for individual users and small businesses who found their entire digital lives locked behind a ransom note. However, a significant limitation crippled this early version because if a victim maintained a disciplined, routine backup schedule, they could completely ignore the hacker's demands, wipe the infected system clean, and restore all their files for free. To break the defensive advantage held by organizations with excellent data backups, ransomware groups evolved their business model into a much more brutal strategy. In this advanced stage, the attackers did not just encrypt the target's local files, they secretly exfiltrated a complete copy of the sensitive data to their own private servers before triggering the lockdown. It solved the limitation of victims using clean backups to bypass the ransom payment. What changed compared to early ransomware was the introduction of secondary leverage, where hackers threatened to leak proprietary corporate secrets or private patient files onto the dark web if the ransom went unpaid. The real-world impact shifted from basic IT headaches to existential corporate crises, targeting hospitals and municipal power grids. Organizations faced massive regulatory fines and public humiliation even if they could restore their systems from backups. The lingering limitation for attackers was that this complex operation required prolonged network access, giving behavior-based security systems a window of time to detect unusual data movement and isolate the threat. Monitor in the middle. While social engineering targeted the human element, attackers simultaneously developed methods to exploit the growing reliance on public, unverified network infrastructure. This technique allowed an attacker to secretly position themselves between a user's device and the internet, intercepting the data flowing between them. It solved the attacker's problem of trying to guess complex passwords by simply stealing the data while it was actively moving through the air. Despite this speed, a critical limitation quickly emerged as the global web transitioned to mandatory HTTPS encryption, which scrambled the intercepted data into an unreadable mess that could not be deciphered without a unique private mathematical key. Denial of service, DDoS. When security protections made data theft increasingly difficult, attackers turned their focus toward pure operational disruption by targeting system capacity. This stage utilized automated networks of thousands of compromised devices, including unsecured smart fridges, home routers, and webcams, to flood a single target with overwhelming traffic. It solved the attacker's problem of individual servers being too secure to breach by simply crushing their ability to process legitimate requests. What changed compared to early single-source disruption was the massive distributed scale of the traffic, which came from real infected devices scattered all over the world. The real-world impact was devastating for e-commerce websites and financial institutions, as their services were knocked offline for hours, causing millions of dollars in lost revenue. This tactic weaponized the growing Internet of Things. Yet a clear limitation still existed because maintaining a massive botnet required constant resource consumption, and modern cloud defense systems began deploying massive global networks that could absorb the traffic flood and filter out the malicious packets. Zero-day exploits. At the apex of modern digital warfare, attackers moved away from relying on user errors or known software bugs, focusing instead on entirely undiscovered flaws in mainstream software. This ultimate stage represents vulnerabilities within operating systems or applications that are completely unknown to the software manufacturer. Because the developers are unaware the flaw exists, they have exactly 0 days to build and distribute a security patch. It solved the attacker's greatest obstacle by allowing them to bypass every single standard defense, firewall, and access control rule instantly. What changed compared to every previous generation of cyber threats was the complete invisibility of the entry point, allowing elite hacking groups to compromise highly secure systems without a single warning sign. The real-world impact is profound, as these exploits are bought and sold on underground markets for millions of dollars, used to conduct high-level espionage before the world even realizes a vulnerability exists. The only remaining limitation is that once a 0-day exploit is deployed in the wild, cybersecurity researchers eventually detect the unusual behavior, reverse engineer the attack vector, and force the vendor to issue an immediate update, closing the window of opportunity.